consider strength out of weakness. Welcome as we take another look into the life and message of Elisabeth Elliot, who called us to live to a higher standard each day. Not satisfied with just a little empty religion in life. As our series continues in the coming weeks, we'll hear from family, friends, and others influenced by the life and message of Elisabeth Elliot. Hey, thanks for coming along today. Well, as usual, we have two Gateway to Joy programs. In fact, they're the last two in this short 4-part series, Strength Out of Weakness, as we'll be thinking about sovereignty, weakness, and more. We'll be hearing from a friend of Elisabeth, Juana Mikels, as she talks about something related to strength and weakness. Some might say old age is a time of weakness. Is it okay to get a facelift? She actually shared a few thoughts about those things. And also, she'll be looking at Job in the hour of desolation, another Bible character who's known for his times of weakness. Well, let's get to a look at sovereignty, the weakness of man, about life support systems for the medically dead, and termination methods for the very much alive.
We've been talking about the sovereignty of God, a tremendous overarching doctrine which undergirds all of our Christian faith. Last week I told you a little bit about a novel that I had written once on the sovereignty of God, trying to probe the question of who God is, where our faith really rests, and what it means to serve Him. Then we talked about man's choices. Do they make a difference? Does a sovereign God really give us the opportunity to make free choices? We talked about what are called coincidences, and I told the story of my meeting up with an African student, and that meeting led to my being able to call a friend who needed help. We talked about how God works through people. A sovereign God is a God who can do anything He wants to in any way He wants to do it. And the way God wants to do a good many of the things He does is through people. But people sometimes take into their hands more than God intends. There is the possibility of trespassing into sovereign territory which is forbidden to us. Modern medicine has developed wonderful ways of handling life and death, which would have been unimaginable a few years ago. It has also developed some methods which face us with mind-boggling contradictions. We have life support systems for the medically dead, and we have what might be called termination methods for the very much alive. And there was a very ironic story that was reported in Time magazine a few years ago. It was called A Medical Triumph. It involved unborn twins. Through amniocentesis, it had been discovered that one of the twins had Down syndrome. So the mother, faced with the horrible choice that would not have been hers without this new medical triumph of amniocentesis, she agonized over the decision, but finally decided that she didn't want the child. So with the simple expedient of piercing the baby's heart with a needle, the Down syndrome child was killed in the womb. She carried both twins to term, delivered one child alive, the one she wanted to keep, and one child dead, the one she didn't want to keep. Well, this was called a remarkable breakthrough. I would ask you to pause for a minute here and consider the question, what was it exactly that was killed? What was it that wasn't killed? The answer to both questions, of course, is a child. They were both children, twins. I use plain, ordinary words to tell the story, the words the news report used. Nothing ambiguous, nothing incendiary. Then, very strangely, only a week later in the very same magazine, I read about another medical breakthrough. This time, the doctors had used an instrument inserted into a womb, not to kill a child, but to save one. This child had a serious heart anomaly, which they were able to correct with intrauterine surgery. I had never heard of intrauterine surgery before, but that sounded wonderful. Can any honest and reasonable person fail to make the comparison? In the second case, the instrument in the surgeon's hand enabled him to heal a tiny little heart that wasn't working right. In the first case, the needle in the surgeon's hand made a heart that was working right quit working. What should we call that? The intrauterine surgery would be called life-saving because they fixed a baby's defective heart. What language are we allowed to use when we speak of destroying a heart that's working perfectly? There is a simple and obvious word, but we're not allowed to use that word. So would we be allowed to say life-destroying as opposed to life-saving? Is that permissible for this neat and efficient technique? Well, not really, because the word life is, in this case, an explosive word, an emotionally loaded word, we're told. Life is not relevant here. It's the mother's life that's relevant. That's the one we're supposed to consider, nobody else's. The other isn't a life, furthermore, not one worth living, and then we get into the very knotty questions of quality of life. Not a life worth living, or at least not one worth the mother's suffering for. So we're not supposed to use ordinary words. They're too emotional. They're loaded. But the cold fact is that they stopped the heart. That's all. They made it quit beating. I was glad that the writer of the article on the baby whose heart was corrected acknowledged the possibility that fetal surgery might raise an ethical question which the medical world thought it had laid to rest. Might it be necessary, in view of these advances, to ask all over again whether a fetus is a person? This is the issue today. It is, in the final analysis, the only question that needs to be considered when we speak of the unborn. Is the thing disposable? Is it an object with no life of its own, a bit of tissue which belongs to a woman who has the right to do with it what she chooses? Has it no more significance than, for example, a pair of tonsils or an appendix? If you don't need it, you get rid of it. If you need it and want it, then you keep it. So what's all the shouting about? Well, this was a legal decision, wasn't it? Truthfulness is the willingness to accept facts. And truth-tellers have always been regarded as either ridiculous or so dangerous as to deserve death. Hannah Arendt wrote, "No truth that crosses someone's profit, ambition, or lust is permissible. Unwelcome facts possess an infuriating stubbornness that nothing can move except plain lies." You may remember that it was Hannah Arendt who wrote a brilliant critique of the Nuremberg trials of Nazi criminals. Unwelcome facts, she says, possess an infuriating stubbornness that nothing can move except plain lies. Here are the unwelcome facts. We were talking about children, the twin who was saved, the child with the defective heart who was also saved, and the twin whose heart was pierced with a needle. They were children. Choices were made regarding those children, deliberate, conscious choices. One, to allow a child to live. Another, to intervene surgically so that a child might live who would otherwise die. Would the surgeon who performed that operation have even thought of saying to the mother that her baby was not a person? That mother knew her baby was a person. The doctor saved its life. That's what the mother wanted him to do, and she was grateful. But in the other case, what was the choice? It was to kill a child. These are the unwelcome facts, but they are infuriatingly stubborn. They will not go away. It was a child. It was killed. Nothing will move those facts except plain lies. We can evade the truth. We can smooth it over, sugarcoat it, color it, or in other ways try to do away with it. But there is an infuriating stubbornness about the facts. So I'm asking you today, earnestly to look at the little creature with eyes and hands and beating heart, held in that safest of places, the mother's womb. No woman who holds such a thing within her doubts that she holds a child. In my last talk, I told about a friend that I had met who had had an abortion. She knew that what she was carrying, even though it was so tiny and almost unrecognizable, was a child. No doctor who extracts that child by whatever swift and safe means can deny that what he extracts is a human being, and that what he does is to kill it. I am asking you finally to think about what Jesus said. I tell you solemnly, insofar as you did this to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me. And Jesus will not forget. May God give us the courage to stand up, to be ridiculed, to take the risks, to make the sacrifices, to do whatever is necessary, to stand in the gap, to be counted, to save these lives. Nothing is necessary but that we keep our mouths shut if we want the world to continue on its downward slide. It's when good and decent people refuse to speak that the worst sins are committed.
Strength Out of Weakness, Part 3, that was Trespassing in Sovereign Territory. Later on, we'll be hearing from Elizabeth talk about Job's hour of desolation and how you can experience comfort in your low valleys as well. That coming up later. Maybe we think of old age as a time of weakness. If we have gray hair, is that a sign of weakness? Is dyeing your hair or getting a facelift, was that okay in the view of Elizabeth? Juana Mikels, author, speaker, and friend of Elizabeth.
I love how in Elizabeth's old age, she said, "I'm not getting old. I done got there." And she was looking so forward to heaven. You know, you so seldom hear that these days, that people say they're looking towards heaven. I mean, everybody wants to look younger. The Bible does tell us that gray hair is the splendor of the old. So I love that. Thank you, Elizabeth. I remember once someone asked Elizabeth if they thought God would be mad at them if they got a facelift. I think she laughed and just said, "Well, I don't think God will be mad at you. You do whatever you think is right." She said, "I'm not getting one."
Juana Mikels, author, speaker, and friend of Elizabeth. Well, let's get to Part 4. This is our final look at Strength Out of Weakness in this current series. We'll be hearing about life out of death, about paradoxes of Christianity, about a baby born with no arms and no legs. Is there still a chance for extraordinary life for a little one such as this one? Turn to James 1, verse 2.
The message of Christianity is life out of death. That's what we're here for, to learn to know that out of the death of Jesus Christ on the cross, we can be given eternal life. And we, in our turn, are to lay down our lives for others. Most of you know John 3:16. It says, "God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, in order that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." Then there's a corollary to that verse, which is 1 John 3:16. This is how we know what love is, that Christ laid down his life for us, and we in our turn ought to lay down our lives for others. Life comes out of death. That is the principle. And strength comes out of weakness. Christianity is full of paradoxes. I really don't know whether there's any other religion in the world that has so many paradoxes at the very heart, but Christianity is certainly one of them. And for the last couple of days, I've been talking about abortion and those tiny, speechless, helpless human beings who cannot defend or speak up for themselves. And now I want to tell you the story of a girl who might have been aborted if her mother had listened to the kinds of things that are being said today. I had a letter from a friend telling me that a friend of hers had just given birth to a baby with no arms and no legs. As I thought about that baby, I thought about my friend Judy Squire from Portola Valley, California. She was born, well, I won't tell you about her defect right away. I'm just going to tell you that I wrote to Judy and said, would you write a letter to the mother of this little boy who was born with no arms or legs? Judy wrote that letter, and I got a copy of it. This is what she said. The first thing I would say is that all that this entails is at least 100 times harder on the parents than the child. A birth defect, by God's grace, does not rob childhood of its wonder, nor is a child burdened by high expectations. Given a supportive, creative, and loving family, I know personally that I enjoyed not a less than average life, nor an average life. But as I've told many, my life has been not ordinary but extraordinary. I'm convinced without a doubt that a loving Heavenly Father oversees the creative miracles in the inner sanctum of each mother's womb. And she cites Psalm 139, which tells how God saw us even before we were formed in the womb, and that in His sovereignty there are no accidents. These are Judy's words. In His sovereignty there are no accidents. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the Creator calls a butterfly. As humanity, we see only the imperfect underside of God's tapestry of our lives. What we judge to be tragic, the most dreaded thing that could happen, I expect we'll one day see as the awesome reason for the beauty and uniqueness of our life and our family. I think that's why James 1:2 is a favorite verse of mine. Phillips' translation puts it this way: when all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brethren, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. This is all from Judy Squire's letter. She says, I love Johnny Erickson Tada's quote. When I saw it on the front of Moody Monthly, October 1982, I was convinced she'd penned the words for my epitaph. Now my husband is aghast to hear me say I want it on my tombstone. Glory be. People with disabilities are God's best visual aids to demonstrate who He really is. His power shows up best in weakness, and who by the world's standards is weaker than the mentally or physically disabled. As the world watches, these people persevere. They live, love, trust, and obey Him. Eventually the world is forced to say how great their God must be to inspire this kind of loyalty. That's the end of Johnny's quote. It was at a conference in California that I first met Judy Squire. We were sitting in a circle having a prayer meeting, and I noticed that she was sitting in a wheelchair. That was obvious. But I began to look at her legs, and I thought there's something funny about her legs. They didn't just look paralyzed. But later that day, I saw Judy in the same wheelchair, and she had no legs at all. Then later in the evening, here came Judy walking along with a pair of crutches. Well, you can be sure I had a few questions that I wanted to ask Judy. And Judy told me that she had been born with no legs at all. She had prostheses, but she said, they're heavy and they're kind of uncomfortable, and so sometimes I just leave them behind. And therefore I had seen her sitting in the wheelchair with no legs, but then later she got out of the wheelchair, had her legs on, and was walking with crutches. Well, Judy is one of the most cheerful, outgoing people that I've ever met. And so she's writing a letter to the parents of a little boy who was born with no arms or legs. Her letter goes on. The above are my hurried soul thoughts. I can't think too deeply with 3 little women popping in and out of this letter writing. But I give you a moment of down-to-earth real life, which I am good at since I'm a very earthy person. Being Christian didn't shield my family from the pain and tears that came with my birth defect. In fact, 10 years ago, when David and I interviewed our parents for a keepsake tape, I was stunned to hear my mother's true feelings. I asked her to tell the hardest thing in her life. Her response, the day Judy Ann was born, and it still is. And yet when we as a family look back over the years, our reflections are invariably silenced by the wonder of God's handiwork. Someday I hope to put it in a book, and I know it will be to the glory of God. Reflecting back over my life, getting married and becoming a mother were dreams that I never dared to dream. But God, the doer of all miracles, intended that my life be blessed with an incredible husband and 3 daughters. Emily is 9, Betsy will soon be 7, and Natalie Joy is 4. I've decided every handicapped person needs at least one child. They are fantastic helpers and so willing to let me borrow their legs when I need help. Well, my friends, I will close for now. Would love to be added to your mailing list. Friends and family do care so much, and you as a family have been chosen in a special way to display His unique handiwork. I pray that your roots of faith will go and grow deep down into the faithfulness of God's loving plan, that you will exchange your inadequacy for the adequacy of Jesus' resurrection power, and that you will be awed as you witness the fruits of the Spirit manifested in the Scott family. And she signs it, Judy Ann Squire. Well, as I've gotten to know Judy and a few others who have similar handicaps and similar testimonies, I think over and over again of Paul's wonderful words in the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. This doctrine of the cross, he says, is sheer folly to those on their way to ruin. But to us who are on the way to salvation, it is the power of God. Undoubtedly, there are some listening to me today who are thinking, I have never heard such a load of rubbish in my life. You're going to try to tell me that being born with no legs can turn into the glory of God? Are you going to tell me that these people whose little boy was just born with no limbs at all are going to find joy and strength in this? Yes, that's what I'm going to tell you. But I think Judy Ann Squire's words carry far greater weight than mine, since I've never been handicapped in any way physically. Paul goes on in 1 Corinthians 1 to say, God has made the wisdom of this world look foolish. But divine folly is wiser than the wisdom of man, and divine weakness stronger than man's strength. My brothers, think what sort of a people you are whom God has called. Few of you are men of wisdom by any human standard. Few are powerful or highly born. Yet to shame the wise, God has chosen what the world counts folly. And to shame what is strong, God has chosen what the world counts weakness. He has chosen things low and contemptible, mere nothings, to overthrow the existing order. And so there is no place for human pride in the presence of God. Then Paul actually talks about himself as being weak. He says, I resolved that while I was with you, I would think of nothing but Jesus Christ, Christ nailed to the cross. I came before you weak, nervous, and shaking with fear. Don't forget, this is the Apostle Paul talking. Most of us would think of him as a pretty powerful man. Weak, nervous, shaking with fear. The word I spoke, the gospel I proclaimed, did not sway you with subtle arguments. It carried conviction by spiritual power, so that your faith might be built not upon human wisdom, but upon the power of God. And I would remind you today that I have nothing to say on my own authority, not a word that would make any sense. But I am talking to you straight from the Word of God. These are His promises. And I've given you the testimony of one woman who has proved in her life that God means exactly what He says. And she quotes the testimony of another one, Johnny Erickson Tada, whose name many of you know, also a woman completely handicapped as a quadriplegic. This is what God does with our weakness. Strength out of weakness.
The fourth in our short series on strength out of weakness. Elizabeth also talked about Job. When you think of weakness, maybe you think of him. And also more specifically, she talked about how you can both comfort somebody else and be comforted in your time of grief. The world has a different feel, doesn't it, in those low valleys?
Just be there. You don't have to say anything. I think Job was probably glad that his friends were there. I trust that their presence did comfort him.
Maybe it evinced condemnation right from the start. I don't know. But my lessons on how to comfort one who grieves have been, number one, to be there. Number two, let it be known that you don't know what to say, but you are ready to help in any way. For example, maybe you can take care of children, do the housework, the laundry, the dishes, make meals, make phone calls, do the letter writing. Let that person talk about the one who died. I noticed that people seem to feel obligated to try to steer me away from the thought of my bereavement, when in truth, the one thing that I wanted to do, which most of them didn't want me to do, was to talk about my husband. I felt as though anyone who would let me talk about Jim or about Ad when Ad died, I would just really feel like kissing their feet, because that was the one thing that I wanted to do, rather than to be steered away from it. Now, perhaps not everyone reacts that way when they are bereaved. I certainly can't give you these as hard and fast rules, but these were the things that comforted me. And there were some simple things that the Lord helped me to see, helped me to learn as I was going through the valley of the shadow of death. First of all, it was to try to be still and to know that He is God. That advice comes from Psalm 46. Things which seem dependable have given way. In that psalm, we read about mountains shaking, waters roaring and foaming, nations raging, kingdoms tottering, and the earth melting. All of these cataclysms are really not exaggerations when we think of how we feel when someone dies. The whole world has a different look, and you find it hard to get your bearings. Shadows can be very confusing. But in both the Psalms, we are reminded of one rock-solid fact that nothing can change. Thou art with me. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Well, as our time comes to an end once again, thanks for letting us come into your home, your office, maybe along with you as you took a drive, wherever we found you, on behalf of the Elizabeth Elliot Foundation. In cooperation with the Bible Broadcasting Network, let me invite you to check out all the resources at elizabethelliot.org. More talks, more devotionals, videos, Gateway to Joy programs, and more. elizabethelliot.org. And until next time, maybe you'd like to leave a review for us and let others know if the program has been of help to you. Thanks. Well, may God remind you each day you are loved with an everlasting love, and underneath are the everlasting arms.